Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we're taking a look at a knife from Artisan Cutlery. This is the Tradition. It's a fairly large size titanium frame lock. They also offer this knife in a smaller size, as well as in a G10 stainless steel liner lock version. This one is the titanium frame lock. And this is one of the earlier models that Artisan came out with. And I actually think this was a pretty good option for them to sort of debut because, it's simple. It's got a look that at least made me say, hey, that looks like it's going to be comfortable in hand, and it is. And that looks like a highly functional blade shape. And it is. So those two things kind of drew me to this knife initially. And so when I was talking to Artisan about having them send some knives for review, I mentioned specifically the Tradition, and they were kind enough to send this along. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details here, beginning with size and weight. This guy is 9 inches overall. You guys know I like the larger folders. As I already mentioned, there is a smaller version available for those who don't, but still like the overall simplicity and practicality of this design. 3 15/16 on the blade, so that's just a hair under 4 inches. 5 1/8 inches on the overall handle length. And this weighs in at a fairly hefty, but not earth-shattering 5.9 ounces. So for a 9-ounce knife, almost 6 ounces is not that unheard of at all. I certainly have knives that are similar size that weigh about the same. Yes, you can find some that are lighter as well, but full titanium frame lock, 6 ounces is pretty much par for the course at 9 inches. In terms of how this carries in pocket, it actually carries really well. One, it's fairly slim for its size. 2, the milled clip works really nicely. It's getting a little bit of wear on this. I've carried it a fair bit. And so in terms of comfort in pocket, this is, again, pretty good. I would say, obviously, at the being, 5 inches of handle here and weighing in at 5.9 ounces, this is not a knife you're going to carry in your running shorts or your linen dress pants or something. But outside of that, the regular stuff that I wear from day to day, I don't notice it as being an issue. Blade on this guy is S35VN. Take a look at that over there. We've got a light stonewash. I actually kind of like the way they've done this stonewash. It's not super grayed out. It still gives a bit of that satin look that I kind of like, but it's also, sort of balanced out to hide use and wear. And I think it's going to do that pretty well. Certainly up to this point, it has. The blade shape itself is a pretty standard drop point blade with a high flat grind. Really, really nice balance here. So we've got, hold on, let's see if I can get this to focus a little better. Come on. There we go. So we've got a pretty substantial blade thickness, not anything crazy, but around 1/8 of an inch. We've got a nice thin edge geometry. So this is actually a knife that slices really, really nicely, especially with that high flat grind. This is a pretty balanced blade. Whatever you're using this for, whether it's, some harder cutting tasks or slicing up a tomato, this is going to work pretty well for you. And that is what I look for. I feel like a broken record saying this, but in an EDC folder, I want that versatility. I want something that's going to be tough if I need it, but I also want something that can cut really well, because frankly, that's what I mostly do with my knives, but I do find myself on a fairly regular basis doing stuff that I think, hey, I want something a little more substantial, and I want to have a knife in my pocket that can do that sort of heavy duty type of work. And certainly this blade delivers in a very balanced way. It's a little larger blade, so you're going to have to consider that, especially depending on where you live. For me, again, I like the extra utility that I get from a larger blade over a smaller one. In terms of lock and deployment, this is pretty well done. Very, very smooth ceramic bearings, nicely tuned detent, easy to access and move the lock bar there. The lock bar tension is not crazy high, but it's certainly substantial, or certainly good enough to do its job. The detent is pretty nice. I mean, I've never had a failure to launch with this guy, and so to me that means the detent is basically where you want it. It's not a super stiff ZT style detent if that's what you're looking for, but it is certainly very functional. Pretty smooth action on this guy. I have no complaints whatsoever about that. And of course, you can adjust this with a Torx So in terms of action, in terms of lockup, in terms of how it deploys, I think this does pretty well. It's comfortable, it's easy to use, it's certainly smooth and has that fidget factor for those of you who like to sit on the couch and flip your knife over and over again like me. And so in all of those areas, I'm pretty pleased with the action on this guy. The lockup, of course, is very solid, no side-to-side play, nothing like that. And so about what you would expect from a high-end titanium frame lock, you know, and that's kind of how I was judging this, okay? I expect this to have pretty nice action, both for its price point and for the part of the market that it's trying to compete in, and it does have action that's consistent with that. Let's talk about the handle. First of all, we've got full titanium scales here. We've got a movable milled clip. You can see there's a little insert here holding the space on the other side. Now, in terms of design aesthetic, I know some people have complained a little bit about that, and I don't know, it's sort of a... To me, it's not a big deal. I know for some that may be a little off-putting having that, you know, sort of bright silver square there. I don't know. I guess if you don't like it, you shouldn't buy one. But to me, it's not a big deal. I do like how they've implemented the lanyard hole into the backspacer there with just a bit of a cutout. In terms of the looks of this, obviously this one is green anodized. There are a number of other colors available. And I do have to speak, while we're talking about the aesthetics, you know, how the knife looks, I do have to speak a little bit about the symbol and the way they've implemented it on the pivot screw. Now, when I initially saw this and, you know, had some time to look at this knife and play with it and use it and stuff, I don't know. To me, this reminded me a little too much of a swastika. Now, since that time, you know, and in an effort to be as fair as possible, I have handed this knife to a number of different people, friends and family members, others who I thought I would ask, and, you know, just kind of anyone who came along who I was able to connect with, what they thought of the symbol. And most people were like, hey, it's fine. In fact, out of the 8 or 10 people I asked, no one saw the connection with a swastika at all. Obviously, I did, but I've got to give a little bit of credit and say, you know, maybe I was a little overblown on in my emphasis of that. I have asked a number of people, and I specifically said, you know, wait, when I saw this knife, I thought this looked a little bit too much like a swastika. And they're like, you did? And I even went so far as to say, look, in my initial video, I gave them a hard time over it. And they're like, yeah, come on, maybe that's being a little too critical. I don't know if it's too critical. As a reviewer, that's kind of part of the deal. You want to be somewhat critical at least. But I will say this, I'll back off my point initially about the swastika looking logo because a number of people I asked just didn't see it. So to be fair, that's the feedback I got from a number of other people. Now, in terms of construction and ergonomics, I have to say I'm pretty pleased with this. You know, backspacer construction is fine. I generally prefer standoffs, but this is very open and gives you a lot of access to the knife and allows you to kind of clean it out there. You can see that there's no internal milling of any kind, so that is adding a little bit to that weight. Would kind of like to see that. In terms of the lock bar cutout, I often talk about this on action and deployment. To me, there's just a little less material here than I would like to see. I like a little thicker lock bar. I like to see a little bit more material left there just for the sake of durability and stability. Again, highly functional knife, and I'm not worried about it failing or anything like that. But I just, you know, it's that weird part of me that wants everything overbuilt, right? Like, and many of us have it. So I would have liked to see that just a little bit thicker. Otherwise, you know, I have no complaints about construction. Fit and finish is nice. All the, you know, everything is where it's supposed to be. You know, I have no big issues with how this is put together. And finally, on ergonomics, I have to give this a lot of credit. This is a very, very comfortable knife in hand. It does exactly what it looks like it would do. It just sort of matches up to your hand very, very nicely. So I have to give high marks for ergonomics for sure. Now, having gone through all of that, let's get to a few comparisons. I'll start off with a couple that are just sort of common knives that everyone is familiar with. The first being the Para 2, so you get an idea of size. The other knife in this category will be the Inkosi, and again, that's because a lot of people are very familiar with the size of this knife, and so having these side by side is going to give you guys a good idea of what you're dealing with. Now, I want to bring in a few other knives. Here's one that I find comparable in terms of, you know, its roll. This is, again, a larger knife. You've got a big blade, lots of edge there, very comfortable in hand, fairly large to carry in pocket. And actually, similar price point. The Artisan, I think, goes for a little bit more before any of the changes that I've made to my Crooked River. All right, but that I think is a decent comparison. If you like the full-size Crooked River, you'll probably like this. I did want to bring in this knife. This is my Curtis F3, mostly because of the size and weight. So, you know, this is an example of a similarly sized knife that weighs even more than the Artisan, and I enjoy this knife a lot. It's one of my favorite knives in my collection. I carry it an awful lot as well. Let's go ahead, let's see here. I've got a couple of other, I think, comparable knives. Here is the Kaiser Milner, which again is a large knife, a little bit sort of on that overbuilt end of the spectrum, lots of blade length here. And of course, Kaiser, so another overseas knife. I have one other, you know, let's see, I'll pull this in here. When it comes to comparisons, one of the things I think we ought to talk a little bit about is that Artisan is another overseas maker of high quality knives. So there are a number of these companies out there who are trying to, through the affordability of Chinese manufacturing, offer some higher end stuff that has really high performance, some pretty good components, but still comes in at a lower price point because of the fact that they're able to build them overseas. And, you know, all of these guys are doing a pretty good job. I like some of them better than others. These, of course, are the two newcomers, Best Tech and Artisan. Best Tech being a little bit older. Kaiser, we've been used to seeing these around for a while now. The one difference, I don't know, actually, it's not that much of a difference. One of the things that these companies do, and I'm not sure why it is, but they tend to have a lot of models, which to me is not serving them well because it makes their knives less special. All right, so Artisan is especially guilty of this. They have a ton of models out there, and it makes each one feel a little less exclusive. You know, yeah, they're well made. Yes, they do offer a lot of variety, so everyone's going to find something they like. But I think if you consider, for example, a ZT business model where they only have a few models, that makes every one of their knives feel a little more exclusive, feel a little more special, and I think they're able to ask and get a little bit of a higher price point because of them doing that. And so Artisan tends to feel a little less unique, or tends to offer, not to feel quite as high end. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop with that. Here's another Artisan model. Now all of a sudden the name evades me and the names are not written on here, so I'm not going to even be able to tell you what it is. It starts with a Z and I just can't think of it. Sorry about that, guys. But I will review this guy coming up. I'll sort of switch out. I've been carrying this one quite a bit. I'll start carrying this one a little more so that I can speak to performance to a greater degree. I will say this, multi-row ceramic bearings on these guys, which is really, really impressive for the price point that they come in at. I forgot to mention that either under action or construction, both of which would have been good places, so I'll mention it now. Overall, guys, I have to say that I really, really like the Tradition. It's comfortable in hand, it carries easily, the blade shape is highly, highly functional, and so, you know, it's kind of got all the things that I'm looking for in a folding knife, and it comes in at a reasonable price. I'm not saying, you know, they're super cheap, but they're definitely competitive when you start comparing to other overseas made titanium frame locks. Plus, you got a lot of colors and a lot of variation coming from Artisan Cutlery. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this knife in particular or on Artisan Cutlery in general. And while we're talking about that, may as well hit the notification button as well. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.